Fire Emblem Birthright is a complicated game. There are dozens of units you might want to juggle building friendships and marriages for, each of which will give you gameplay rewards. But figuring out how to get all these pieces to fit together in a single playthrough can be complicated. Figuring out how to pair units is probably the question I get asked the most often, but it's not really a question I like to answer. Not because it's hard to find pairings that'll lead to good results, but because the advice that's the easiest to apply often just makes playing the game incredibly boring or tedious. So we're going to be doing something different today. Rather than describing how to beat the game in the simplest and most boring way possible, Septi and I have picked out a few units that will make the game a lot more interesting, and we'll each be planning an entire playthrough around this team.
So we're going to be trying a couple of silly builds, not ones that we would necessarily recommend for optimal play. There will be some mixed quality here, but the goal with all of them is just to take advantage of some units and try to use them in fun, different ways that fit them. And notably, they're all quite silly.
Yeah, the nice thing about Birthright is that you can build a lot of different things in parallel. You don't have to dump all of your resources into a single unit because that's the unit that you're focusing on this run. You can have a bunch of different units that you want to build in their own unique ways, and they don't have to necessarily conflict with each other. They can all be using different sets of resources, and you can have lots of fun things going on in the same playthrough. So today, we will be doing Bolt Naginata Paladin Sakura, Vantage Life and Death Kagero, Oni Chieftain Orochi, Salvage Blow Jakob, and Soul Butler Shiro. We'll be going into their actual viability and how much they're going to be used in fast play later on, but these are quite divergent from the typical things that you would see in a standard beat the game as easy as possible way.
Yeah, they're a little out there, some of them at least. And the point is just to illustrate how you want to make multiple units work within a single playthrough and how you want to manage those resources. Notably, we've picked this number of 4 that are taking a lot of work to make work and 1 that's a little easier because that's a good number of carries to have in a playthrough. You don't want to make all, 15 or 16 units that you deploy into total hard carries, but you also probably don't want to just dump everything into one unit. It's good to strike a balance there. And we've picked 4, but you could do maybe 3 carries or like 5 here. 6 if you wanted to, you could cut the number down, but you just want to focus on a small handful.
The goal of this video is not to recommend that you do this exact set of playthroughs, but these are just different ways for you to consider how do I want to plan my playthrough to make it as interesting as possible? Because there are a lot of ways to play this game.
Yeah, the point here is to more look at, this is the sort of way of thinking of like how to maximize your resources in order to enable the pairings that you want and the builds that you want. It's not about these specific pairings, it's about the way of thinking and the way of managing your resources.
And the way that we're planning things, we want to ensure that full recruitment is possible. We don't generally recommend doing full playthrough if you want to have the easiest time finishing these builds, because full recruitment requires you to deploy units that you otherwise wouldn't want to build support ranks, which can sometimes give you a harder time than is necessary to beat the game. But full recruitment allows you to see all the content that's in the game, and that is a consideration to be made. We're also doing a standard no-grind rule set, so none of the degenerate features that are definitely possible in Fates. The path bonus and bonus box, skirmish maps, DLC, lottery shop for seals, logbook and castle skills, foreign units that you can just buy off of other My Castles. These things can definitely make the game easier, but you can still do a lot of cool things without any of these. They definitely break the game in ways that a lot of people consider unfair, so we typically don't use them when we're discussing the game.
Yeah, my general litmus test for if I'm going to include the discussion of a resource is imagine loading up a fresh copy of the game on an airplane. And if you could do it for that, it's probably okay. If not, then we'll probably leave it out. So anything you'd have to go online to do, and anything that would take like excessive amounts of time or grinding, just we'll ignore.
Yeah. So in planning a run, there are a few things we should get out of the way. In doing full recruitment, there are 11 men and 11 women, and you need to pair all of these together in order to create all of their children. Every man and every woman that are not directly blood related can produce children. So Jakob can produce children with any of the women on the right side, But, for example, Ryoma cannot produce children with his sister Sakura and Hinoka.
Yeah, the other exception is the Korin sexuals, which cannot marry anyone except for Korin, but they also don't produce a child, so you don't need to worry about them for that. And then notably, Korin does kind of throw a wrench into this because she can be either gender and she does produce a child. So because Birthright has an even number on both sides, you do need to consider if Korin is going to screw things up by taking one of the Generation 1 women if Korin is male. But I think we've both planned for female Korin, so female Korin, you can just marry whoever and you'll still get all of the children.
So yeah, there are 13 kids that are possible in the game. Each of the men has one child that they produce, along with Korin and Azura, who, with their childbearing hips, can produce an extra child on top of the fixed child from the male parent. The child that is produced is fixed based on who the fixed parent is. So, for instance, Midori is always produced by Kaze. They all come with their own sets of classes, personal skills, but they do inherit things from their parents. And choosing a wife for each of your men can produce different results with your children.
The mother end up altering, notably, the hair color of the child, and then for Azura and Korin, that is obviously switching the gender of the parents because they are the fixed parent.
So the child is dependent on the fixed parent, while the variable parent can pass down some things in inheritance. The first thing that is passed down is a class from the mother, and the parents also pass down some base stats if their personal growths have exceeded the amount of stats that the child would have gained from auto levels. The actual calculation of that is a bit complicated and has a few asterisks, but just know that if your parents are very, very blessed in a particular stat, then the child will probably get a point, maybe 2, of inheritance from that.
Yeah, if you want to know a child's exact base stats, I guess I'll put this out there. The Oife bot, or I guess it's the Veil bot now that people use, will not give you accurate base stats for the child. There is a calculator pinned in the FE14 channel in Mecha's Keep that can calculate it, but you don't need to know the child's exact base stats, and knowing how it works probably isn't important, because, you'll know the child's general stat line, and because this is Fates, you can modify stats around pretty much as you please. So you don't need to worry about the exact base stats.
And the child's growth rates are also dependent on the mother. So each child has their own personal growth rates, and the effective growth rates that you actually get in-game are the average between the child's growth rates and the variable parent's growth rates. So the child does have a very significant impact on how they'll end up, because turning someone like Sophie into a mage probably isn't going to be great, even if you have Orochi as her mother, who has a very large magic growth.
Yeah, and notably, it is just the variable parent that influences the child's growth rates, even if the fixed parent is Korin, who has modifiable growth rates. So Korin, Bane, and Boon do not affect Kana's growth rates, which is something that I think a lot of people don't know. So that's worth keeping in mind for Kana. And then, yeah, you generally want to mix a physical parent with a physical child, or a magical parent with a magical child, unless the child is so exceptional at that stat that they'll just be fine regardless, which is true of quite a lot of children.
Of course, if you're not planning on having your child see combat and are rather just using them as a support unit, then of course stats are not going to matter in that case. Sometimes you do want your children to be your primary combat units, and in that case, messing around with ensuring that you have the best variable parent possible is probably something that you want to do.
Yeah, and notably, obviously you don't need the kids, and so if you're just getting them to play their maths and get the content, you can just use anyone. It's only if you care about the child and you want to make them better and optimize them that you really need to worry about all the details.
So, another one of the cool things that children have is that they can inherit skills from their parents. So in this example, we have a sniper and a falcon knight. Now, when they produce a child, the last skill in their skill list gets inherited by the child. So in the sniper's case, that would be Bowfair, and in the mother's case, that is Warding Blow. Now, you probably don't want Warding Blow on a child unit that is a Shrine Maiden, so what you might want to do instead is switch around the skills in the mother's skill list to have Rally Speed as their last skill, so that the child would inherit Rally Speed in addition to the Rally Luck they start with.
And notably, this inheritance occurs at a different point in the paralogue depending on the child. For instance, in Miitoma's paralogue, it occurs when she comes out of the house, whereas in, say, Rajat's paralogue, since she's the boss and you can kill her and still recruit her, it will occur at the end of the paralogue if you do that. This means that there are some paralogues where if your parent learns a skill mid-map, they will pass the child. So just keep that in mind. It depends on the child's recruitment situation in the paralogue.
And finally, the last thing that gets changed with inheritance is stat caps. Stat caps almost never matter outside of a PvP setting, so this usually isn't something to be considered, but just for the sake of completion, cap modifiers for a child are equal to the father's plus their mother's plus 1.
And notably, that +1 is just a flat +1 if they are a child, so a Generation 3 Kana does not get the +1 twice, unfortunately. Although Gen 3 Kanas have the best caps in the game. Anyways, not caps ever matter.
So, there are several builds that we want that require some pairings that you cannot change without something like Corn Marriage. Those are Paladin Sakura, who requires Silas Marriage to partner seal into Paladin. You need Felicia Marriage to get Soul Butler Shiro, so that Felicia can pass down the Butler class line along with access to the skills in the Mercenary class line. And you need Rinka Marriage to get Salvage Blow Jakob, because Rinka is the only female unit that can pass down the Oni Savage line.
And this is always good to look at if you're planning a build that's a little more out there, of making sure that it is actually possible without Corrin. I know in Conquest a lot of people bring up Wyvern Effie that you just cannot do without Corrin. So making sure that it is possible, and then setting aside the units you care about with their pairings first, just to make sure that you don't, in your other pairings, like deprive them of a resource you wanted to give them.
Yeah. Now, the other builds that we're building towards don't require fixed pairings, because Orochi can have access to the Oni Savage class line through both marriage and friendship. And Kagero has 4 whole ways of getting into the Samurai class line, so they have a lot more flexibility in how they want to achieve their goals.
Yep. And we still probably want to look at, in terms of like allocating resources, allocate things to them before we allocate things to other people. If we do care about the method by which Kagero gets Samurai, then we don't want to give that up on some flunky who we're never going to deploy. But notably, they don't need to be as much of a focus as the other 3 who only have one method of achieving their plans.
And to be clear, there is going to be more than one way to achieve all of our goals simultaneously. And to demonstrate that, Septi and I have both come up with our own unique pairings for our playthroughs. So my set of pairings is going to be very different from Septi's pairings. Of course, there is a bit of overlap, but the way that we've routed our playthroughs is very, very different.
Yeah, we both wanted to try out different ways of showing how you could achieve these goals, just to prove the point that if you have a plan that you want to try, you can go about it in a lot of different ways. You don't need to come up with some static plan that people have come up with and then follow that. You can really do anything you want as long as the end result is the same.
And another thing that we need to consider when planning a run through Fates is other resources that are very limited early in the game. The one big thing in Birthright that's very limited is the Heart Seal. You only get 1 Heart Seal before you get to the second level shops after Chapter 13. Figuring out who you want to give that to can have a very big impact on how you plan the rest of your run. So for both of us, we wanted to give that first Heart Seal to Sakura, which means that other good candidates for that Heart Seal, like Jakob or Corrin or Hayato, do not have access to that Heart Seal.
And this is why you kind of want to focus on a small handful of units between 3 to 6 units, because you just don't have enough seals to make every single unit work unless you start dragging unpromoted and unreclassed units to Chapter 21, which is just ridiculous, and you don't want to be doing that unless you absolutely have to. So this is why you want to pick a handful of units just to make sure that you have enough seals for all of them. And we've planned our seals in pretty different ways here to achieve our different goals.
Alright, so let's start going through our husbands in recruitment order, starting with Jakob. Now, Jakob is first because we chose to both use female Corrin. Now, Jakob is going to be one of our primary targets for investment because we want to have him do a Salvage blow build using Rinka Marriage. So in order to get him to have Rinka Marriage as soon as possible, we want to have him recruited as soon as possible. So we have him as our first servant by having Female Corn be our choice of a player character.
And notably, I also have other plants later on that do require female Corrin, so this works out pretty well. And Jakob is a very solid unit in Birthright to invest in anyways, so having him early is pretty helpful. I feel like his early combat in Birthright feels a lot more notable than Felicia's does, whereas in Conquest they're basically interchangeable. Most the important roles.
And I know a lot of people like to pair Renka with Kaze, because a Kaze with Rinka pair-up can have very impressive contributions in Birthright's early game. But Jakob effectively fills the exact same role and has slightly better stats overall. So Jakob also has access to 1-2 range shurikens. The weapon rank between Jakob and Kaze is effectively the same. Jakob also notably has an extra tile of movement over Kaze, which really benefits him in getting to kills that Kaze otherwise wouldn't be able to and move through maps faster. And Jakob has desert movement, which allows him to move through Chapter 8 significantly faster and more flexibly than Kaze. And Jakob has staves to provide additional utility just because he's that good. Jakob is a very impressive early game unit and will be making contributions if he's given a Rinka pair-up.
Yeah, the whole Rinka-Kaze pairing is mostly just pairing Rinka into a dagger user is very strong. It doesn't specifically have to be Kaze, and in fact, Jakob is also noticeably bulkier than Kaze, so he'll do the job even better. And then, even though Jakob's growth rates aren't the best, because of his super fast EXP gain, he can get promoted skills early, which is why our build of choice for him is trying to just rush a promoted class skill that he can get extremely early on. And then once his combat is not as good because we've put him into a role where his combat won't be maximized, he turns into this support unit who can take kills to produce weapons, which is a strange type of support, but it is technically a support unit, I guess.
Salvage Blow is from the Blacksmith class, which is a possible promotion from the Oni Savage class. So Rinka Marriage is required to get him there, and it is a skill % chance to produce an iron version of the weapon that the opponent is holding. So it can significantly increase the amount of econ you get if you're willing to slow down and feed Jakob lots of kills.
It's actually luck %, which is still fine for Jakob because his skill and luck are both absolutely massive. So he will be getting this skill pretty early and then producing a lot of weapons throughout the run. Obviously, you don't need these extra weapons, but it does let you... the big one is you can do, in Birthright specifically, you can do like absolutely mega-sized forges with them, which is very fun.
Now, where the two of us diverge is what we want to do with Jakob after we get him into Salvage Blow. So, Septi, you want to Heart Seal him back into Paladin, right?
Yeah, so Shelter is the best skill in the game, and having as many people with it as possible is very useful, and it allows you to speed up your pace through the maps so much, and it's just, even if you're not trying to go fast, it is the most flexible skill in the game. So, I want to put him back into Paladin, just to give him something to do on turns where there isn't a kill for him to poach to proc Salvage Blow.
Shelter is definitely something that you want to be getting on as many units in Birthright as possible. But I have other plans for my Heart Seal, so I do not get Shelter on Jakob right away. I do actually go for a more Mimi option and pass down Salvage Blow to Dwyer. Now, Dwyer is another unit that starts in a mounted class, meaning that he will be able to poach kills that a lot of your other units might not be able to. So, putting another unit on the map that can produce weapons just from getting kills in player phase is funny, even if it's not really the best thing you could be doing with your resources.
Yeah, unfortunately Dwyer's luck is not anywhere near as good as Jakob's, so he won't be outputting weapons at quite the rate Jakob will. But anything helps if you're trying to end up with like a Iron Shuriken +4 or +5 or whatever. Or I guess you probably couldn't even manage that because there's so few ninjas, but if you want like an Iron Naginata +5.
Yeah, if you're willing to do a lot of things in the arena to get as many gens as you have to spend to get to that point, then yes, you can get very big forges in Birthright.
You'll probably only be able to do it with whatever your castle, like, gem itself is, but, you know, no matter what that is, you'll be able to produce some sort of silly weapon with Salvage Blow. Unless you're in Conquest, notably, because you can't forge machined weapons in Conquest. But that's why we're doing this in Birthright.
So the next male unit that we want to pair up is Kaze. So this is where our choices diverge. So I am going to be pairing Kaze with Mozu, while Septi is going to be pairing Kaze with Azura. Now, I guess I'm going to start with why I like the Kaze-Mozu pairing. So Kaze isn't really a unit that you want to be using long term, so he is one of the better candidates for an early promotion. Early promoted Kaze is generally a unit that you want to be sending out to chip units to set up kills for your other units, and Mozu is a very solid unit for being his pair-up because Mozu does not boost his offenses in any way, meaning that he will not get any kills that he doesn't want to as long as he's using the appropriate weapon, like a Brass Shuriken. An early promoted Kaze is going to be pretty useful early on and drop off very quickly in utility. In that time, he will have enough opportunities to see combat in order to produce a child.
On my end, I didn't want to do the same because while you can kill off Kaze and it's maybe easier, I know a lot of people just like to have every unit alive at the end of the game, even if they aren't going to use them. So I plan to keep Kaze alive, which does mean, unfortunately, building a core and A support. And so I've paired him with Azura instead to maximize Midori's Profiteer chances.
Yeah, my playthrough is definitely going to be quite a bit easier if I don't get the Kaze-Mozu marriage, because if I don't care about raising Kaze and Mozu, I can save Mozu's paralog for very late in the game after chapter 13, when I get the second tier shops, and this gives me a very good opportunity to start training weapon ranks and building supports with other units, like Hayato. I like to use Oni Hayato in my runs just because he's a unit that I enjoy, and hey, saving Mozu's paralog for this late gives me a very good way to train him in a place in the game where training a axe-locked level 1 unit is not always going to be the easiest thing to do. So this allows Hayato to potentially even reach C rank in axes, to reach the bolt axe that he gets in the next chapter, if you really want to go that route.
Yeah, with my pairing, I won't have that option. Instead, though, we do unlock Azura's paralog. Notice pretty early on, and Azura's paralog for Shigure is another training map. It's not quite as free to train in as Mozu's is, but it'll help that difference down. But yeah, the main goal of my pairings is just we're making the game harder to keep say alive in.
Shigure's paralog is notable for having a lot of promoted units, and getting those kills early on, if you get that paralog unlocked early, can provide lots and lots of experience to your lower level units. It's pretty impressive how quickly you can get promoted if you do Azura's paralog early.
Yeah, Birthright does not do internal levels for enemies in a lot of cases, so it just assumes that promoted enemies are level 20 and 1, even if they're so early on in the game that they aren't that scary. They're still giving as much EXP as a level 21 unit would. So you can get pretty ridiculous EXP gain if you go into a paralog with promoted enemies early.
And our next husband is going to be Tsubaki. Now we also have different pairings for Tsubaki. I went with Setsuna and Septi went with Hana. So I like to promote Tsubaki early to rush rally speed, and doing that requires him to get to level 5 promoted, and I find that Tsubaki doesn't really get to contribute very much in combat just because on enemy phase, his offensive stats still aren't great even after promoting at level 10. It also takes quite a bit of investment to get him to level 10 in the first place. To get him past the difficult parts of his training, I have him pair up with Setsuna, and Setsuna's archer pair up provides him with an extra +2 in attack and speed, which really helps him make better contributions without having to invest in spending tonics in Tsubaki.
I, on the other hand, just do not like Tsubaki at all, and I want to minimize the time spent with Tsubaki. He needs quite a bit of work, and I'm not willing to give it to him here because I don't have the pairings that I have set aside mean that I don't have the options to give him good combat. So instead, we're just rushing his Hana marriage and then instantly replacing him with his daughter, who just has better stats than him. So if we want to early promote someone to get rally speed, she can do it instead.
And Tsubaki and Hana notably have a fast support, meaning that they can be building supports in fewer maps than your other standard pairings. They only take 6 maps to get married rather than the standard 7.
And in those 6 maps, it's not terrible to even use Hana's combat, because you do get the early Armor Slayer, which she's one of the few people who can use. And then she also has better offense than Tsubaki at the cost of her bulk. But it does mean that she can poach kills decently and build support points with Tsubaki that way.
And if you want to get Caldori as soon as possible, it also comes with the upside of giving you a sword catcher in her paralog. Caldori starts with the sword catcher in her inventory, and you normally wouldn't get that until you get the level 2 shops in chapter 13. So you can use the sword catcher earlier than intended to get things like the standard kill in chapter 12 a lot easier.
Yeah, there's nothing like super practical to do with the early sword catcher, but there is a lot of very fun stuff, like the Xander kill that you mentioned. And sword enemies just are generally around, and you can like use a sword catcher dual strike to do just massive damage to feed a kill to someone. There's a lot of fun things to do with it.
If you want to raise Mozu seriously, then the sword catcher can definitely be a big help early on. Next up, we have Silas. Now, we both have Silas marrying Sakura because we want Sakura to be a paladin at the end of the game. But if we want Sakura to be used to her fullest potential, we need to be using the first heart heal on her as well, because she really wants to get into Sky Knight to start training her lance rank. The weapon that we want Sakura to be using late game is the Bolt Naginata, which requires C rank in lances, meaning that she needs to see combats with lances 50 times before she can unlock the weapon. So, in order to start building that as soon as possible, she needs to be in Sky Knight as early as possible. The first heart seal on Sakura is pretty much required if you want to do this build without spending the entirety of the left side of chapter 19 to feed her kills.
Yeah, you probably could do the reclass in chapter 14 and then arm scroll her, but arm scrolls are rare and very useful. So it's a lot easier to heart seal her first, especially because her EXP gain is going to be so much better in Sky Knight and in Shrine Maiden, so she'll just end up with better stats anyways.
Getting Sky Knight Sakura early means that you can use her combats to do things in the early maps where benchmarks aren't particularly high to reach to kill enemies. So she can build a lot of weapon rank using Paralog 1 and Invasion 1, and get a lot of experience from sources like the horses in chapter 14 and the wolfskin in chapter 15, and she will definitely become one of your better combat units once she gets past her rough start.
And notably, her and Silas actually make a pretty fantastic combat team. We've both listed a bunch of different stuff that they can do together here, but they do synergize with each other very well. Silas gives Sakura the stats that she wants, and Sakura gives Silas flight that lets him get places to use. Is fantastic. So they do a very good job together.
Sakura notably also gives a speed pair up to Silas, which sometimes he really likes, and if you use them in attack stance, you can build Sakura's weapon rank in addition to providing Silas with an aura, which is -2 damage taken, which can be really big in letting you survive when you're down a healer, because Sakura will be stuck using lances and not staves.
Obviously, you can reclass Silas to have incredible combat, but we aren't planning to do that in this run. So instead, he just gives his pair-up bonuses, which are also amazing to Sakura. And they give her all of the stats that she could want, which is strength early game and defense late game, because he gets to promote to Great Knight.
Being mounted also means that you give a movement pair-up, which can really accelerate the pace at which you move through maps, especially when Sakura is also going to be on an 8-movement horse. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, this is a genuinely quite solid pairing. It's pretty easy to make work, so we've both roughly are doing the same thing with it.
Now, our next pairing is going to be Saizo. I chose Kagero as his wife, while Septi chose Setsuna. Now, I'm using Saizo more as a support unit for Kagero, because Kagero really does need it. Kagero is known for having very big strength, but her speed at base really isn't where you want it to be. So Saizo providing an extra speed pair-up along with an extra movement pair-up can allow her to get some kills that she otherwise wouldn't be able to. It's really nice supporting the speed of Kagero because if she goes skill dipping in suboptimal classes, she doesn't have the +2 speed that shurikens give, meaning that she will need quite a bit of support in order to start doubling and one-rounding. So providing an extra speed and movement pair-up from Saizo's ninja class line really helps her.
I have other plans to get Kagero everything she needs, so instead I can just put Setsuna on Saizo, and where you early promoted Kaze earlier to use him as a Jagen, I'll essentially be using Saizo as a Jagen here, because Setsuna's pair-up bonuses are just insane on him.
I believe with Setsuna pair-up, even at no support rank at all, he can start one-rounding everything in chapters 9 and 10, besides a small handful of enemy types. It's kinda crazy.
And then once they do start getting pair-ups, Setsuna's bonuses are pretty much just pure speed, which is kind of the only stat he needs for a while.
Going back to Kagero, Saizo starts in the same base class as Kagero. So the class that gets passed to Kagero through marriage is actually Samurai, which is Saizo's Heartseal class, which is very vital for getting Super Kagero, which requires Vantage and Life and Death, which come from the Samurai class line. So Saizo is one of the avenues to get Kagero there. I do want to get Kagero the Samurai class line to get to Life and Death, but in my build, I do want to have Kagero pass through the Basara class line as well, because I want Quixotic for the extra hit rates, because I want to be doing things in attack stance, which gives her basically no safety net to miss at all. Septi will be doing something different later on.
Yeah, and Kagero notably does need a lot of help to not miss. Her soft stats are quite abysmal.
Even if you use her as one of your late game carries, promoting at 20, her defense stat just won't be there. So providing the ability to get through those levels as fast as possible with a speed and movement pair-up really helps her. So next we will be moving on to Azama. Now we both wanted to pair Azama with Hinoka because first of all, it is a fast pairing, meaning that it will take one fewer map to get them to an S support than with other units. And they're just generally pretty easy to race together. Hinoka notably has the Guard Naginata, which means that she can see a lot of combat that a lot of your other units just wouldn't be able to survive. So she can just rush into groups of enemies, chip them down, and build support ranks that way.
And she doesn't need anything besides the Guard Naginata to do that, because it is so good. And she is the only person with Sea Lances for quite a while, so she's the only option you have to do that. But you can just pair Azama into her, and she won't kill stuff that way, which can just let you work on other projects. If you did want her to kill stuff, you could make her do that instead. But since we don't have any future plans for her, we don't want her.
And just deploying Hinoka and Azama, having Hinoka see lots of combats, and building support ranks really early in a map means that in your later turns, you can have Azama function as a healer, which you might be pretty short of when you're reclassing both Sakura and Jakob pretty early on.
And Hinoka will probably be still damaged from use earlier in the map, and you can just have Azama heal that off just to squeeze out a few extra support points.
While we don't really care about the child that they produce, we do get her very quickly, so we can get lots of experience from her map and her many stationary enemies there.
Yeah, there are just stationary enemies at every turn, and there's also a ton of promoted enemies in the map. Like, there's a stationary sniper, who I believe is really promoted, so yeah. You could go wild with that.
Next up, we have Hayato. Now, we have extremely different methods of raising Hayato. I guess I'll go first. Now, I like to use Hayato as a primary combat unit just because I think it's fun. So I will be significantly investing in Hayato and later his daughter Rajat. So this is going to be more of a demonstration of how I would route in Hayato in a normal playthrough if I wanted to use him without spending the first Heartseal on him. So The way I would do that is I would just not deploy him until after Chapter 13, where you unlock the second tier shops and you get access to more heart seals. So you're getting your second set of heart seals pretty late in the game, but if you save the easy maps of Invasion 1 and Paralog 1, you can have a very easy way to train him to get the weapon rank that he needs to start using things like the Pike Rune Club, which will make him one-shot everything on the right side that isn't promoted in Chapter 14, which can significantly speed up how quickly he gets to level 20 and promotes. And I like to use a speed pair up in Hana, who allows him to start doubling things because in the Oni Savage class, his speed does need a bit of help, but his magic and strength are going to be just fine for letting him do the job that he needs to. So pairing him up with someone that gives speed is what he really needs to start killing everything and not dying.
Yeah, and that works to turn Hayato into a very strong unit, as you've demonstrated. You have a lot of stuff on your channel making Hayato work. With Fate's mages, the thing is that they all have 2 of magic, skill, and speed, and Hayato is very much magic and speed with no skill. So he has awful hit rates, which I think makes him tougher to train, and you've obviously worked out ways to make that more reliable. But if you don't want to go through the reliability boosting for Hayato, you can also just use him as a pair-up bot.
And even if you use him as a pair partner, as long as he gets an S support with someone, he will produce probably the best mage in the game, which is his daughter Rajat.
Yeah, and notably because Hayato's stat line it's a little weird compared to Rajat. He will basically never give her a magic inheritance anyways, so you don't lose out on that, and not training him loses her, like, probably a point of defense, which is not a big deal in the grand scheme of things.
The amount of effort that it takes to raise Hayato is, I'm going to admit, significantly higher than just putting him in the backpack of someone and getting Rajat that way. But I think it's more fun, so that's what I like to do personally.
And it's always fun to train him, but he does also just have pretty fantastic pair-up set. I think his personal pair-up bonuses include +2 speed, +1 magic, +2 luck, which is just, I mean, obviously the luck could be something better, but like +2 speed, +1 magic is just about as good as it gets for a mage pair-up.
Yeah, and it is especially good for Orochi, who really does need the extra speed.
Yeah, so that's what I've planned for my run for Hayato, is just to pair him into Orochi, use him for a massive speed pair-up that can also be, if necessary, switch to a defense pair-up, depending on how she levels. Because he does a great job of that. Because, yeah, I don't want to go through the effort of training him, because I don't like working with those sort of hit rates. But if you do like training Hayato and you want to make it work, both options are completely viable.
I personally like using Hana as his pair partner more than Orochi because Hayato has an easy time getting Vantage, which if you really want to be able to leave Hayato unattended in a group of physical enemies, having Vantage just adds so much to his reliability in being able to just get rid of enemies before they have too many chances to attack him. He also has one of the easiest times getting Vantage because Master of Arms still has access to axes, so he can use the Bolt Axe and just kill things in that class.
You also get him Seal Strength there, so if he does fail a kill on an enemy, that enemy will never be able to damage him again.
Yeah. So our next husband is going to be Hinata. So I am pairing Hinata with Orochi, because Orochi really likes having as much speed as possible, and Hinata as a samurai can definitely provide that. The +4 speed of the samurai class is just slightly higher than the +3 speed of the diviner class, so it's useful in that respect, and it will also give Orochi access to the samurai class line to get Vantage herself. So Vantage is of course one of the big bulk boosting skills because it will allow Orochi to, if she doesn't double enemies, two-shot them on the following enemy phase if her HP is below half before they can deal damage to her, which can be very big in making sure that she's usable even when you don't want to invest everything into her and maybe your rally speed user is somewhere else on the map.
and particularly on Oni Chieftain Orochi, because she does have such huge magic, and the Bolt Axe has so much might. She won't be able to one-shot everything with it, but there are some enemies that she will just be able to take out in one hit if she's in Vantage range. It's a good skill to have on her.
Hayato notably gives Orochi access to the Oni Savage class line through his marriage, while giving her Hinata marriage requires her to build a friendship with Rinka, which is actually pretty convenient to do because Rinka does want to train her tome rank at some point, and having a magic and speed pair-up makes it particularly easy for Rinka to get away with doing that.
And in early game, they even make a decent pair-up as well, because Rinka's personal gives her so much attack power in early game, where like +4 attack is enough that if you double the enemy, you must just kill them. And Diviner does give Rinka the speed necessary to pull that off. So they make a good early game team as well. But by having Orochi marry Hayato instead, I get to just cut that out a little bit just to make there less balls in the air to juggle.
And another issue is going to be, of course, getting the levels with Orochi in Samurai, but in Birthright, that is a lot less of an issue just because Seal Defense is a skill that is on one of the best units in the game in Oboro. So Oboro will probably be deployed in quite a few maps, and feeding Orochi kills left behind by Oboro makes things a lot easier to get her leveling in physical classes.
Yeah, so it's not too bad, and there is always the extreme option of if you build her axe rank in Oni to D and then arm scroll her to bolt axe rank, you can just use the bolt axe in Sphere of Arms, which it's probably going to take you on arm scroll, but you can do it because she is one of our primary carries, so it's not too big a deal to give her an arm scroll to make her training arc easier. I wanted to pair Hinata with Kagero because we do need Vantage on Kagero, and this gives us a few other options. Hinata's pair-up bonuses are insane. In Samurai, he gives a huge amount of speed, and then his personal pair-up bonuses are all strength and defense. So your plan was to have Kagero just poach kills and ignore her defense for a bit with a movement pair-up. My plan is instead to just try to fix her speed and defense using Hinata to let her get her kills even while early promoted.
Of course, we don't really care about Hisame.
Yeah, neither of us care about Hisame. Orochi being a magic mother for him, like, if anything, his paralog will just be played for the XP and then he'll be ignored if his paralog is played at all.
Even with an optimal mother, Hisame generally never turns out very well, so just dumping him with Orochi is not a huge concern for us.
And it's not like Kagero would even be that optimal mother either. So both of our Hisames will end up not good. And then we'll just forget about him.
Yeah. Now, Takumi is a husband that is probably one of the more difficult ones to get married in the game because he's an archer. And archers primarily get 1 combat per player phase, and that's about it. So getting him support points, if he is a primary combat unit, will generally require you to either do some very precise finagling with attack stance and positioning, or just will take you a lot of maps to build enough support points to get married. It's really not a great time, so what we have opted to do is instead make him the pair partner for one of the best units in the game, who doesn't really need that much support to really see a lot of combats and get a lot of things done. So we have both pairs Takumi with Oboro.
The archer pair-up is fantastic. It gives a lot of stats, so it can help Oboro just hit plenty of 1-round benchmarks on her own because she effectively has 16 base strength, so if she doubles something, she kills it.
And Oboro is a very easy unit to deploy because in early game Birthright, 1 range is going to be a lot more common than 2 range, and Oboro just has incredible stats. So deploying Oboro is going to be something that you will be wanting to do anyways, and on top of that, she provides the additional utility of providing seal defense. So she will be seeing even more combats than you would otherwise be getting on a physical combat unit, just because you want to send her out to groups of enemies to chip them down, to build your other training projects like Skynet Sakura and Hayato and Samurai Orochi if you really want to go that route.
Yeah, so since we have those project units that we want to be working on, having Oboro be strong for a couple maps to help feed them is pretty useful. And then Oboro ends up being useful all game long. She does come with Swap innately, which is pretty... It's not quite as good as Shove, but it's still pretty solid. You can use it as a discount shove early on by swapping ahead of someone. You can also use it to swap with Azura after she's danced in order to change the diagonal parity of a shelter dance, which is very useful. And routing in Takumi technically gives you the option of giving Oboro a mount if you aren't planning to use her late game, even though that's probably not going to happen.
And even though Takumi doesn't give her a particularly good marriage class in Archer, Oboro doesn't need a good marriage class because she already has access to the Apothecary line, which gives her Mechanist from her Heart Seal, which is really big if you want to continue using her long term. You don't need to give her any sort of major investment with her pairing, because she's just good no matter who you put her with.
Yep, and so we might as well just use the pairing that lets us get rid of Takumi as quickly as possible, because Takumi is really only impressive for a handful of chapters, and after that we just kind of want rid of him.
They do have a fast support, meaning you don't need to deploy Takumi for very long, which is always a good thing for units that you don't want to be using. So next up we have Kaden. Now, I went with a bit of a meme option, and I am pairing Kaden with Azura. So this is not going to be the fastest support, because doing so would require either putting Azura as Kaden's backpack and having Kaden see a lot of combat, which probably is not going to happen, or using Azura to dance Kaden lots and lots and lots of times in order to have Kaden see lots of player-face combat, which, while probably not the fastest way to move through maps, is a very fun playstyle, and Birthright can definitely be played on player phase for most of the game until you reach, like, chapter 23.
Yeah, and it's very fun to have the, because Kaden does have just incredible starting stats, and so giving him 2 actions a turn is fun. I've instead opted to use his incredible stats as a way to deal with Mozu's terrible para by just, Kaden's got good stats at join, just blab Mozu on him, he'll be fine enough to fight and build points.
Both of these do require Kaden to see quite a bit of combat because his wives are not going to be seeing very much combat, so you are going to be using Kaden whether you like it or not if you go this route. But we happen to like it, so it's what we went with.
Yeah, there's a pretty significant portion of time in early game Birthright where there are just a lot of one-range locked enemies. Like the chapter 14, for instance, just has the massive hordes of paladins. Kaden with, like, the beast rune equipped is just fine to take those on for a pretty long time. So he can get in a lot of combat and build up those support ranks pretty easily.
So our final husband is going to be Ryoma. Now, this is another one of our fixed marriages because we need Shiro to get the Butler class, and it is only possible to get him both Soul and the Butler class if he gets Felicia as his variable parent. My route was to reclass Felicia as soon as possible to get access to the Soul skill to pass down to Shiro.
I, on the other hand, have other plans to get Shiro's Soul. As we mentioned, you can use Korin's talent to supplement literally anything. So rather than needing to excessively feed Felicia to get Soul, I just plan to put her in, probably Bonite actually, to just pass down Strong Riposte to Shiro instead.
So training Felicia is not particularly difficult because you have access to things like Seal Defense from Oboro and Ryoma Dual Strikes, and Ryoma can even set up kills with the Kodashi in order to first build lots of support rank with Felicia, as he does that on enemy phase against tons of enemies, and also gives Felicia enough chip damage to allow her to finish things off. Felicia being underleveled for her joining time also really helps with getting the experience that she needs to get to later skills.
Yeah, Felicia joins at level 13 with her, special unpromoted EXP gain, and bringing a level 13 unit into chapter 16 means that she is the same level as the unpromoted enemies, and the promoted enemies in that chapter are level 2 and 3, I believe. So they are 10 levels higher than her, which is...
meaning that she gains 30 extra points of experience from them, which is quite a lot.
She only needs a handful of kills to level up, which means you can get a chase skill that you want on her within, like I mentioned here, you need five kills to get her Stronger Post. Getting Soul after that would probably be only another 3. So her EXP gain is tremendous. It's not too hard to find a way to feed her a kill and instantly have her learn a skill.
And Shiro is also a pretty good candidate for a Soul user in this game, because he can inherit Vantage from Ryoma. You do need to make sure that Ryoma does not learn something like Astra, which would displace Vantage from being inherited. You would want to swap the skills around in advance if that happens. But Vantage and Soul on a Dagger user is very, very significant, especially when you have the defense stats of Shiro.
And as we mentioned before, we mentioned in the child section that you usually want to pair physical parents with physical kids unless they have exceptional stats. And Shiro does have just exceptional stats, so he'll be fine even with a magical mother. The main thing Shiro just needs is a good class, which Butler provides.
Yeah, Felicia is the only mother that provides access to Butler. He could also get access to Mechanist or Master Ninja through Kagero, which would also mean he gets produced faster, but that would require Corrin Marriage in order to get Soul, which Felicia Marriage allows him to get around, because Felicia can learn Soul herself if you want her to.
And as we've mentioned, you can use Corrin to supplement any build that you want to do and make it work. So that's what I've chosen to do here, just to pass down Stronger Post, just to give him a little bit more attack, because daggers don't have a lot of might, and Butler has pretty low strength, and we have reduced his strength pretty heavily with Felicia as his mother. So I just wanted to have a little bit more offense there. And Corrin Marriage provides a lot of bit more offense.
Okay. Next in line we have our mothers. Azura produces Shigure. Now, Shigure is actually one of the better kids in Birthright because he basically comes with rally speed if you choose to recruit him pretty late, on top of a personal skill that is effectively rally HP.
Yeah, he's one of those Fate's healing sources that lets you cut out using staves, and the more times you can cut out staves, the better, because staves don't give much EXP, they're not even that great at building support, they're expensive, there's no good reason to use them if you can avoid it, and this is a way to avoid it.
Now, if you do choose to get Shigure and keep Kaze alive to do so, you will get Shigure very early, which means you have another source of healing when you are down 2 healers when you reclass both Sakura and Jakob. And you can also cram in Lock Touch utility if you have Kaze as his father.
And I don't actually mind pairing Azura and Kaze too much, because notably, this is a thing that I see a lot of people do that I think is a bit of a mistake. In situations where you have all of your units except for Azura grayed out, and there's one half-dead enemy that you want to kill, frequently people will dance Azura, or have Azura dance a unit, and then that unit takes the kill, when there's really no reason not to just have Azura take the kill herself. Until Azura hits level 10, she is the best recipient of EXP possible. And notably, in Birthright, if there is an enemy who didn't die, the reason they didn't die is probably because they were in combat with Kaze, which means that he is 2 spaces away to provide a dual strike to build up much faster support points and EXP on Azura than Singing would provide.
Meanwhile, I paired Azura with Kaden, and that means you will be getting Shigure pretty late in the game. But recruiting Shigure late in the game means that he will be getting auto levels to get to level 5 promoted and getting rally speed on his join time. And he will have probably D rank in staves to get him access to the Bloom Festal, which is just another source of healing if you really need to top up 1 unit before you send them into a big group of enemies.
I believe you need to delay his recruitment until 21 if you want him to instantly promote and get rally speed, or 20 if you're willing to feed him a kill. That's fine if you're doing a relatively late pairing, you can just save his paralog till then, because that's a point in Birthright where the EXP curve is very not good for you. So having a paralog to get EXP in is quite helpful for getting your late game skills online.
And Kaden doesn't really do much to support Shigure in any meaningful way, but you probably aren't going to be using Shigure for much other than support anyways, so that doesn't really matter.
Yep, Shigure is, in theory, combat Shigure could be a thing, but he just has so much utility function that he basically comes with for free that you might as well use it.
And moving on, we have Corrin. Now, we went with different avenues of pairing Corrin. I wanted to pair Corrin with Dwyer to pass down Salvage Blow yet again to get a third Salvage Blow user. It certainly is not the optimal thing to do because you really won't be hurting for money, and you will probably be able to do pretty much everything you need without having to farm for gold, but getting skill procs and getting a weapon for that is just fun, so that's what I chose to do.
Yep, it is one of the most fun skills in the game. If anyone watching has not tried out Blacksmith Midori before, try it out sometime. Because just having as many salvageable procs as possible is very funny. Gotta work towards that Iron Naginata +7.
Meanwhile, you mentioned that you had other plans for Shiro getting Soul, and in your case, that is through Corrin marriage.
Yeah, so this allows us to give Shiro a fantastic pair-up while also passing strong riposts from Felicia instead, just to make him as good at combat as possible. Corrin is the best unit in the game at enabling literally whatever you want on any unit. It does not matter what your goal is to do with a unit, Corrin can make it work. Her pair-up is ridiculously overpowered. She gives access to any class in the game. Any unit you want in any class, Corrin can make them overpowered. So that's what I'm doing here. We're just Fighter Corrin. She can be a Wyvern pair-up or a Berserker pair-up while also giving Shiro access to HP +5 and Hero.
Corrin being a fighter talent provides her access to Rally Strength, which can be very big when you're using Corrin as a support unit. It allows things like Samurai Orochi to work. You can train Mozu if you really want to. I know it's possible to get Corrin to Berserker by like chapter 8 of Conquest, because I know Jarvis C did it, right?
Yep.
In his Jakob solo run.
Yeah. Because Corrin effectively gets level 10 for free from Branch of Fate, So
having Berserker Corrin provide support is one of the easiest ways to meet your physical benchmarks. It just makes any kill pretty trivial to get. And Corrin is not limited to staying in her Heartseal class or her base class, because Corrin is privileged in that she can get friendship with any unit in the game that's of their gender.
Notably, this usually means that you're pretty much locked to classes that are innate to your country's root, except that Scarlet joins in Birthright, so Corrin can still end up in Wyvern even in Birthright.
She notably only can get Wyvern through friendship if it is a female Corrin, because a male Corrin would have to marry Scarlet to get into Wyvern.
But we've both elected to do female Corrin here because we wanted Jakob anyways, so it works out.
So of course, you might have noticed that we haven't been bothering to raise or care about all of our units. We haven't been doing super optimal pairings to optimize all of our children, because that really isn't necessary. When you get to the late game, you only have 15 deployment slots, and if you try to raise everyone, that really won't provide you with much of a better return than picking and choosing who you want to bring to your late game maps and just raising them.
And notably, we've gone above and beyond by trying to make as many units as we reasonably want to viable. In reality, you can do so much less than this and still be fine. You just want to pick out your handful of carries. And this is just an example of how you could do that.
And of course, notably here, we're not really using the standard carries in Birthright that you otherwise could be using. You could, of course, just use Ryoma, Yukimura, Izana, Corrin, and plow through the rest of the game like that, but that's no fun. We do want to use the targets of our investments to plow through the late game in a way that only they can. Figuring out who you want to be raising and pathing the game to make that possible is a lot of where the fun comes from in this game.
And we've both put here generally how you want to structure your deployment of just like, here's a bunch of combat units, here's their pair-ups, and then everyone else can just fill in flunky jobs. Because Fates is unfortunately not a game that really rewards having a lot of combat units. So no matter who you want to use, you can turn them into that combat unit, and then just make them as powerful as they can be, do what you want to do with them, and then just find convenient ways to fill in deployment. And obviously, while we've given specific examples here, the point is not to do these examples. We're not actually recommending these builds, although plenty of them are viable and you can try them out if you want. This is more of, here's how you go about creating these builds and creating a team.
I see a lot of people going online and asking for specific advice. Who's the best parent? And a lot of the advice that's given is recommending that you effectively play the game in a extremely simple and boring way that's, while you might have a very easy time with, you're not really experiencing all that the game has to offer, and being more creative with your builds can let you see another side of Birthright that you otherwise would have missed out on.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of the advice either boils down to, oh, just use Ryoma, or going fully in the opposite direction and giving advice that's like, oh, you should play essentially like how Zoran does his Train Everyone challenge. But that run is called a challenge for a reason. It's an incredibly difficult way to play the game that's making it very hard, and the goal is probably you want to find some sort of happy medium between the two of like, okay, we have some pretty overpowered carries that we can deploy to, sweep through the game, but we've also trained them in these, out of meta builds. So yeah, it's just one way to plan a playthrough.
Now, we want to make something very clear. You don't need to make the perfect pairings every single time, because a lot of the time, you aren't going to be using every aspect of what you are building towards. If you want to make, the perfect Hisame, he will still just be filler combat unit number 10.
Yeah.
So you don't have to go out of your way to dip into level 15 skills to pass down to make the optimal child. That usually isn't going to bring you very much return unless it's the way that you want to have fun.
Yeah.
You don't need to super optimize any build in any route in this game in order to have an easy time getting through the late game. As long as you've put some thoughts into, here's who I want to make good and here's how I want to make that happen, you don't have to consider too much far beyond your primary combat units in making things super optimal.
And we've done a lot of very suboptimal pairings here. Like, neither of our Ashura's husbands are doing anything for her or for Shigure, and yet we've both planned to deploy Shigure here. Just because you don't need to optimize Shigure to still deploy him, and you don't need to optimize really any child to still make them work. It's just about trying to figure out what lets you see all of the content that you want to see in the game, and you'll have strong units when you reach the end of the game. Notably, if you don't care about a particular piece of content, like if you don't want to play the Hisame paralog, you just don't have to get Hinata married. You get to pick and choose what you want to see and which paralogs you want to play, and just to make sure you're... The only important thing really is to make sure you're flexible about it and you know what you want to do.
So let's go into our late game deployment builds and see what each unit plans on doing.
So these are the units that I plan to deploy here. Notably, you'll notice Korin is here in two potential different roles, of either being a Wyvern Lord pair-up for Shiro or a Berserker pair-up for Kagero. So we mentioned that we had different plans for fixing Kagero's hit rates, and potentially using supportive is what I wanted to do. But the thing is that exploring Kagero as Vantage Life and Death using daggers in guard stance isn't something I've done before. It isn't something a lot of people have done before. So I have no idea if it'll work. And that's the point of sort of having these more flexible plans, is that, if it turns out that Berserker Korin isn't letting Kagero meet the one-shot benchmarks, which I'm pretty sure it will because Berserker Korin is broken. It's basically a built-in life and death. Then we can just pivot and still have a strong Korin here by switching her to Wyvern Lord. And that's the crazy thing about Korin. She can enable any build, and she's super flexible, so she can just do anything. But from there, I have the carries that we've laid out. So Kagero, Shiro, Sakura, and Orochi, which we had preset plans for because those were the builds that we wanted to do for this demonstration. Then followed by a bunch of support units. I think the only unit beyond those 6 that I intend to do maybe any combat is Yukimura. Everyone else is just providing different support functions, whether they're para bots or rally bots, or Midori, who is a money-generating bot. Their jobs are just support, because once you have 5 or 6 combat units, that's honestly more than you need. Most maps in Birthright late game do encourage you to sort of split up into groups and have one group tackle one side of the map and one group tackle another side of the map in order to clear them quickly, because they're very large, very open route maps. But one unit can take on 10 or 20 enemies on a single side. So, yeah.
So, Birthright notably makes it pretty difficult for you to stack utility functions on a single unit without that unit being a child. So you probably are going to be deploying separate units for rally speed, rally defense, rally strength, rally magic, and Yukimura's hit +5. But you have so many deployment slots that you don't need to fill with combat units that deploying all of them on a single run probably isn't going to be very difficult to justify, because, let's be honest, who's going to be providing more utility? A 5th carry, or hit +5 for every single unit on the map? I think I'm choosing hit +5 more times than not.
Yeah, and that's probably the weakest support function we have here, and it's still clearly better than having another combat unit. Notably, if you do want to make a broken support unit, you can absolutely probably optimize some child to have a ridiculous number of rallies or auras or something, and then they can fill a bunch of these deployment slots as well. The game is so flexible, you can do whatever you want, and this is just one way you could do it.
Moving on to my deployments, I do have a few more carries because I have went out of my way to raise Hayato and Rajat, who are just going to be pretty solid combat units that can take as many hits as they need to and perpetually survive. So I've also done something different with my Kagero build, because I like to deploy Kagero and have her solo parts of the map on her own without the need of any supporting units. My avenue for doing this is, instead of pairing her up with someone, I have her do this in attack stance, dual striking off of herself. She gets replicates from the Mechanist class line, and if we stack Shuriken, Fair, Life and Death on top of that, she can reach damage benchmarks, and with the benefit of Vantage to not get hit before she can kill the enemy, and Quixotic to ensure that she gets as close to 100% hit rates as possible, it is definitely possible to get her to start clearing entire chunks of maps without any support.
Yeah, the Vantage attack stance with your self build is very cool and very fun. It's something that you really need to early promote to do, but then the end result is this very interesting unit of essentially one unit who takes up 2 squares and also has perfect combat.
The big issue with Kagero is getting to the hit rates that won't cause you to reset after turn 3. But if you get to that point by dipping into Basara for 4 levels, which is quite a big ask, but Birthright is a game that is flexible enough to let you do that. Once you get there, Kagero will be very impressive.
Vantage Life and Death is like the classic way to make pretty much any unit broken, but Kagero in particular gets to exploit it with her huge strength and access to replicate.
She caps strength when promoting at level 10, even without stat boosters when she reaches level 20. So Kagero is probably the best unit to do this on if you don't want to give all the drugs to a particular unit. So yeah, my support units are very similar to the ones that Septi has. I have Rally Defense, Rally Speed, Rally Strength, Sing, 2 Shelter users, hit +5, and I have either Yukimura or Dwyer for access to Salvage Blow to be funny, with getting even more weapons at a point of the game where it's completely unnecessary, but it's fun to just get more weapons. Or I could deploy Izana to get Rally Magic to make it even easier for Paladin, Sakura with a core and pair up to plow through everything and push so far ahead of the maps that other units just will never be able to keep up.
Yeah, so we've ended up with a lot of the same deployment. And there are some things here that you'll probably end up with regardless of what you do. Like a captured berserker is a big one that you'll probably end up in basically every Birthright playthrough, no matter how you plan things. The captured berserker is so useful to have around.
On top of having rally strength, they also provide the utility of a +5 strength pair-up, which is pretty rare in Birthrights.
Yeah, the support units that we have overlapping here are probably the things that you will actually see every playthrough, but you'll swap out carries to be whoever you want, like Hayato and Rajat as one of your combat carries, but it could be literally anyone. And of course, in a playthrough that someone else is doing, you'll probably want to pick completely different combat units because you'll have a different set of carries that you want to pick. And so those swap out, and that has a knock-on effect on which support units you bring, but a lot of them will be the same. Like Scarlet, a captured berserker, probably Yukimura, yeah, and of course Azura.
So again, the goal of this video is not to recommend that you do this exact set of playthroughs, but these are just different ways for you to consider, how do I want to plan my playthrough to make it as interesting as possible? Because there are a lot of ways to play this game.
Yeah, the point here is to more look at, this is the sort of way of thinking of like how to maximize your resources in order to enable the pairings that you want and the builds that you want. It's not about these specific pairings, it's about the way of thinking and the way of managing your resources.
You don't have to spend all your time optimizing every little thing. As long as the things that you care about are as good as you want them to be, that's all that matters. Is there anything you want to add? Is there anything you want to plug at the end of this?
I think we've went through it all. Yeah, I'll mention my channel again. Mentioned it a few times now, so I think, yeah, just check me out if you're interested. Yeah, thank you.